Hi, I'm Colette Bancroft, the book editor of the Tampa Bay Times, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you to the 2021 Virtual Times Festival of Reading. We'll be taking questions from the audience later in the hour, so please enter your questions in the chat for Louise to respond to. With us today, I am thrilled to say, is Louise Erdrich, a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. She's the author of 18 novels, as well as several volumes of poetry, children's books, and nonfiction. She's one of the most gifted and accomplished American novelists writing today. Her novel, The Roundhouse, won the National Book Award for Fiction. Her novels, Love Medicine and La Rose, received the National Book Critic Circle Award for Fiction. And her most recent book, except the new one, The Night Watchman, won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction this year. Her new novel, The Sentence, was published this week. She lives in Minnesota with her daughters and is the owner of Birch Bark Books, a small independent bookstore in Minneapolis. Welcome, Louise. I'm so delighted to have you join us for the Tampa Festival of Reading. We've met before in 2017 when I had the very great honor of presenting you with the National Book Critic Circle Award for Fiction for La Rose. And so it's lovely to see you again.
It's wonderful to see you too. And thank you for that extraordinary moment. I'm so happy to say hello to everyone who's tuning in, chiming in later. And I'm just so happy to be here and have some time to have a real conversation.
Great. We are glad to. So let's jump into The Sentence. Many of your novels have had historical settings. Your Pulitzer Prize winner this year, The Night Watchman, is set mostly in the 1950s, based in part on events that actually happened to some members of your family. Other of your books, like The Last Report on the Miracle at Little No Horse, go back a century or more for their settings. Others have had more contemporary settings, but The Sentence feels like it's set in and was written in almost real time. What made you decide to take the plunge into this book, and what was it like to write it?
So I started this book perhaps 7, 8 years ago. I would start it every year, and I'd always start on All Souls Day because, as one of the characters says, the tissue is the veil between the worlds is thin as tissue and easily torn. So I always kind of superstitiously started it then because I knew I wanted to write this book about a haunted bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
So I would then I'd drop it for another book, or something would come up, or I wouldn't be able to finish it. I finally said 2019, All Souls Day, I will not stop for anything, no matter what. And if I had known what was going to happen, I would never, ever have written it. I'm sure people are saying this all the time, if I'd known what was going to happen.
Right.
But for a writer, a novelist that I am, not a journalist, not someone who writes in real time,
Mm-hmm.
it was incredibly challenging for me. And I thought I would put it back down many times.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't write it in real time. I had no focus. I was just trying to go day to day, and I didn't write during the first part of 2020. So it was mostly, I took some notes. I took some cursory notes, not much, but my daughter Palace, who you met as we were getting online here,
Yes.
took screenshots of all of the texts that we exchanged during that time. Those were incredibly helpful. And also, I talked to so many people. I just began to interview people about what happened to them during that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really written in the in the last part of 2020 and into the first part of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was a very fast publishing turnaround. So
Yeah.
I haven't stopped working on this book at all. It happened so quickly. So that's
Mhm.
what it seems as though it was written in real time, but
Yeah.
it actually wasn't.
Yeah.
I
But
couldn't have done it.
you do, and those texts may be part of the reason for this. The book really captures that feeling that I think a lot of people had in that first part of 2020 of disorientation, of being overwhelmed. And because the book up until then has a lot to do with, family and the bookstore and things like that. And then this thing just out of nowhere, this thing rolls in over everything. And then a few months later,
Yeah,
when George Floyd is murdered, another giant thing rolls over the city.
right.
And you really, it seems to me, you were writing close enough to it that you really conveyed that almost, paralysis, confusion, all of those feelings. Yeah.
Those feelings, it was a inundation, a huge wave washed over us here and over everyone in the world in so many different ways. But I felt in the end I could only re-experience it through the lens of my characters. So I had set these characters up.
Yeah.
Time I really had been writing about them and thinking about them, and I had this relationship between Tookie, who is my main character,
Mhm.
and and a very sturdy, ironic character who commits a crime, is incarcerated, and learns to read, as she says, with murderous attention in while she's in prison, and with her and with Pollux, who has arrested her. So, I lived with that relationship for a while before May 2020,
Mhm.
this tremendous uprising
Yeah.
and it occurred.
Mhm. Yeah. So their lives were sort of for you already in motion and
Yes, and it only occurred to me quite late in all of this that this fact that he had arrested her, which was sort of meant ironically in the beginning,
mhm.
became an enormous issue between them because they have a very good relationship.
Yeah, I love their marriage. I love the way you write about their marriage. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I do too.
Mhm.
Pollux is like my ideal man.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I wanted to marry Pollux too.
Me too. I, he was he had all the right kinds of flaws, and he
Mhm.
had all the warmth and
Yes.
and he's very funny, and
Yes.
and they have that together. So for them to reckon with their past as well as the rest of the world was reckoning with the
Mhm.
past of policing and the past of, we were reckoning with how we had narrowly averted so many pandemics, and now this
Mhm.
one came in with a crash.
Mhm.
All we were all reckoning, and they had to reckon too.
Yeah.
That was part of
Yeah.
what what propelled the rest of the book.
Yeah. To go back to Tookie, who's the book's narrator,
Yeah.
um, the book begins, she introduces herself with the story of the crime for which she is arrested and for which she serves a decade in prison. But the account of that crime is so hilarious, is so funny. I've seen it compared to, Elmore Leonard or a Coen Brothers movie, or, it's this kind of slapstick, just it's one of the most spectacular introductions of a character I think I've ever read. And it made me wonder, where did Tookie come from?
Where did she come from? I don't know, because I started it many times, and then suddenly this sentence came to me while in prison. I received a dictionary.
Mm,
Oh, here, I'm gonna, and I knew exactly what she got from her teacher, because this is her dictionary, and it's got all the things in it that I described, and I won it from the National Football League when I was just graduating from high school.
oh,
I
that's
won
great.
this dictionary, and I have kept it with me
Hmm.
at all times during my life.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of dictionary. And
Yes.
and so I wrote the book. So much of it was inspired by the dictionary and by Tookie's relationship with words,
Hmm.
and by her 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 skewed outlook on the world, which is very familiar to me because I've found so many times as a mother, an extended family member, an extended community member, so many people around me. You know, I I just live in this very uh, hilariously complicated world
Hmm.
sometimes
Hmm.
that for so many people and for me, sometimes one mistake builds on another, and it branches off
Hmm.
to an absolute catastrophe, which happened for her.
Yeah.
As she
Yeah.
says in the beginning, she was given, because of the complications of her crime,
Yes.
a sentence of 60 years by a judge who believed in an afterlife.
Hmm.
And I've been in courtrooms, I've been there when people
Yeah.
received sentences that were
Right.
so incommensurate with crimes. So
Hmm.
this book also became uh, a bit of a referendum on incarceration as well.
Right. Right. Yeah. And Tookie gets lucky, and we get
Yes.
lucky, because she gets out, and this, but and she, I said in my review that two things save her, turn her life around: Pollux,
Pollock's
books.
and books.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and also her world tour of soups, which she does when she's
Yes.
broke. She can't, she can't, doesn't have a kitchen, nothing else, just a few bucks. And she goes on a tour of soups through Minneapolis and St. Paul, where she'll stop at a tiny, tiny hole in the wall
Hmm.
restaurant and always get the soup.
Yep. I think subconsciously I was influenced by that, because this week I was so busy with the festival that I was like eating on the fly and, grabbing just whatever was at
Right.
hand. And I finally had a little time Friday night, and I made a big pot of soup.
Did you?
So I think Tookie's
Did you?
influence was staying with me.
Did you eat that soup all week? Because that's
I'm
what
still eating it. Yeah. I'm
I make a
gonna
big
have
pot.
some after we're done.
Yeah, I'm gonna eat what I made. I've been busy too, and I just make a big pot of something. And
Hmm. Yeah.
that's what I do too. Yeah.
And the making it, not just the eating it, but the making it,
It
made me feel
is.
better. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you feel better.
Hmm. Yeah, it does. Um, she's such a funny character. And you have so many characters in your books that are so humorous. Is it easier or harder to write a character who's funny?
Funny is the hardest thing to write. I mean, I think tragedy, I think anything is easier to write
Mhm.
than funny. So I chose funny over tragedy in this book.
Mhm. Yeah,
It's not giving away too much to say that. But
right.
I really felt like this year, as I wrote the book, I went back and I changed a lot of it because I thought we need someone funny to talk
Mhm.
to. I needed
Mhm.
Cookie.
Right.
I needed her to have that just off outlook on the world, is
Right.
unexpectedly sometimes she's kind of brutal,
Yeah.
sometimes she's
Yeah.
just, just in your face, sometimes
Mhm.
she's tender,
Mhm.
sometimes she changes throughout, but I needed someone who had a just could be funny. I needed that
Yes.
so
Yeah.
much.
And there are certainly things in her life that are tragic, but for her, humor is a shield, a weapon, a
Yeah,
defense, you
so,
know.
so well said. And that's what humor can be: a
Mhm.
shield, a weapon,
Mhm.
a piece of self-protection.
Mhm. And but also a way to tie yourself to people. A lot of the beautiful, warm part of her marriage is that they both have that kind of sense of humor,
Yes, it
they're
is.
on that same
Yeah,
wavelength,
they're
and
on
it's
that same
like a comedy team. Yeah.
are kind of. But the fact is she also ties herself to someone who is going to be a ghost who haunts her, just dramatically haunts her, and
Yes.
becomes more powerful with
Hmm.
the isolations
Right.
of what happened during the pandemic.
The pandemic. Yeah. And I was coming around to asking about Flora, um, that uh, she's the customer who won't go home even after she dies. And
Well, she
died. She dies reading a book that becomes very key in the plot. And I don't want to spoil anything for those who haven't read the book yet. But she, as you say, after the pandemic, when they have to close the bookstore as the pandemic begins, they're still working.
right,
Usually one person is in the store at a time and they're filling orders and taking calls and all that thing, that kind of thing. And when Tookie is there alone, this ghost starts to manifest. And at first, and she recognizes her. She recognizes the sound of her clothing rustling and her feet, moving. And she goes, it's Flora because she goes to the sections of the bookstore that Flora always went to. And then Flora starts throwing books off the shelves that are
yes,
sometimes books that have her name in the title, you
right.
know.
They're meaningful
Yeah,
to the
yeah,
plot,
yeah.
and also they're books I really like.
Mhm. Yeah. But
And
Flora's an interesting character to me too, because the bookstore is your bookstore, and I'll come back to that in a minute, Birch Bark Books, and it specializes in books by and about Indigenous people.
right,
I love that the younger people who work there call themselves the Indigerati. That's a great name. But she comes there because she's very interested in that subject matter, but she sort of crosses a line. At first, Tookie calls her a stalker and says, maybe that's a little harsh, but she's a wannabe.
right.
Someone so interested in Indigenous culture and Indigenous people that she wants to think she is Indigenous. And I wonder and I've heard about this from other people as well. And I wonder if you can talk about that phenomenon a little bit.
It's become a phenomenon. I didn't grow up with anyone who was um, really trying to see themselves falsely as Indigenous, or Indian, as it would have been said at the time, because it didn't have a sense of job security attached to it. But things have changed, and this happens. It's very common. Flora isn't an academic, but
Mhm,
there are many people who are in academia who often it's people who have some family rumor that they enlarge personally until it becomes a cloak, an identity, something that person can't get rid of. It's I think it becomes it's a painful sort of thing, because then once you've identified yourself and you have a job based on it, or people know you as somehow being native, you can't let go of it. You have to keep it up. So
mhm,
it becomes painful because people have to sort of make this performance of indigeneity, and they have to
mhm,
adding bits and pieces to the identity. And this, and so I think it's really difficult. It's not, but it's really hard on people who are really native, and who see people who are not indigenous able to perform the sort of indigeneity that non-native people expect, and so they become known as indigenous, and the jobs go to them. And that's
mhm,
quite common.
mhm.
It's quite common, more than I thought when I started the book. I was
Really?
not, yeah, much more common than I thought.
Wow. Yeah.
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 So Flora's not a bad person.
Mm,
And
mm-mm.
most people who are not bad people, but
Mhm,
this sort of assumption of identity can be, um, it's very disturbing sometimes. It's one thing when people are academics and they're teaching native students, and then the native students are learning somehow to be a performative person and not,
Mhm.
not part of their own communities. But
Yeah.
um, with Flora, she has worked in foster care. She is always there for people. She is, you know, sh- Tookie says she'll do your laundry. I mean, she's also a book lover.
Yes.
There are a
Yeah.
lot. It's very complicated for
It
Flora.
is. It is. Yeah. Yeah. And that, of course, the fact that she is such a book lover, and particularly this kind of books, is one reason that she haunts the bookstore.
Right.
But it turns out to be more complicated than that, um, on many levels. And the reason that she chooses Tookie, is something that we learn only very slowly, uh,
Right.
over the course of the book.
And
Although I was
sorry,
going to say, I think a few other people hear her, or you know,
eventually. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
she
Be-
gets
Because she,
stronger.
she gets stronger. Right.
Mhm.
But also, so there is this book that she was reading, which there may be a sentence in this book that has killed her. So
Mhm.
we begin to, there are layers of sentences and layers of
Said yes.
books, but layers of particular sentences, like the most
Mhm.
beautiful sentence in the world, the
Mhm.
the most the sentences that strike Tookie to the heart,
Right.
the sentences that she thinks maybe Flora needs to hear in order to go away.
Hmm.
There's so many.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, you set the book, you said you'd always wanted to write about a haunted bookstore, but you chose to set this one in your own bookstore, in the bookstore that you actually own in Minneapolis. And I'm assuming that most of the characters who work in the bookstore, who are this wonderful, charming group of people, um, are fictional, or mostly fictional, but you put yourself in there,
Oh,
uh,
right.
as a minor character, but
Mine.
a couple of funny appearances, and and also a couple of worried appearances about how are we going to keep this business, running, um, in the midst of this. So I wonder if you can talk about why you didn't just make up another bookstore, and why you decided to put yourself in.
I tried, but I couldn't do it. I don't have enough of, I feel like you have to have a very deep experience of a bookstore. And then later, I think, I tried to sort of pull it back and I didn't name the bookstore because then I began to worry that people would come into the bookstore and ask the people working there now if they were in the book and try to figure that out. And
Where's
uh,
Becky?
yeah, I know, where's Tookie? But then I tried to dial it back because I was worried about everyone. So nobody is, I made up characters,
Mhm.
made up people in the bookstore, and made up Louise, except for Louise is cleaning up a horrible mess at one point.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to tell people, writers, especially women, do things like clean up horrible messes all the time. I think there's this idea that somehow we're sitting at our desks or in our chairs and just scribbling away, but it's not
Mhm.
true. There's
Mhm.
there's enough absurdity and mess to go around.
Right. Um, the, the the bookstore theme sort of gets continued through to the end of the book, where you give your readers this fabulous bonus. And those of you who just got the book and haven't read it yet, when you get to the end, you will see that there is a reading list of, it's more than 150 books, I think,
A lot
and
of books.
it's a lot of books. And I started reading it, and I was either saying, yes, I love that book, or, oh, I need to put that on my list.
Oh, good.
And, yes. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why you decided to do that, to give readers that gift,
I
and
would love to.
and how you made the choices.
All right, because I love this moment where we get to recommend books, and I'm going to ask you to do this. Where we are, we have a few minutes until, but I'm going to just put some books up that are not, some of them are mostly not on the list because they're just out and they're great. Ann Patchett's These Precious Days.
Oh yeah.
Well, essays. This is just out. It's on the list, but I just want to hold it up again because this 1,000 Years of Joys and Sorrow, I still go back to it because Ai Weiwei's world, his life, his existence in China, his incarceration means so much to me. Cherie Dimaline, who is Métis, has a new book out. She is, oh my gosh, she's such an amazing writer. And so Hunting by Stars. And she's referenced in the book quite a bit. Ministry for the Future, that is, I think I got that in, but it's the book to read if you're disturbed about climate change and you want to see how people can come together to solve it. It's a very positive, somewhat science fiction, but also of the moment book. And here's a children's book that I think everybody kind of loves. And it goes with my quilt. So I'm going to put it up.
Yeah.
Water
Oh,
for
yeah. Yeah.
That's a wonderful children's book. Okay. And lastly, this one is in, but oh my, I just talked to Natalie Diaz.
Oh, yeah.
I became overwhelmed again by how beautiful that book is. So
yeah,
now,
that's an amazing. Yeah, that's an amazing book. Yeah, well, I concur with you on that one. Certainly, I concur with you on Ann Patchett's book, which I'm about to review, and a couple of I certainly want to recommend a couple of our novels by a couple of our festival authors.
Oh,
Lauren Groff.
Matrix, right?
Matrix, yeah, which is about 12th century nuns. And it's nothing like what you would expect a book about 12th century nuns to be. It's just amazing. It's about the power of women, and there's actually not a male character in the book with a name.
No.
And
it's about food, and it's a sensual book.
Yeah, it is very much so. It's about life in this remote abbey and how these women really learn to do everything for themselves.
Oh, it's so powerful.
Yeah, it is. And also Honoré Fanon Jeffers' book, her debut novel, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, which is just amazing.
It is.
About the history of a Black family going back more than 2 centuries, told mainly through the life of a young woman, a contemporary young woman, but kind of expanding. And it's about race and history and families. And it's just a really tremendous book. And one more book I'll recommend that's not out yet, but that's coming up in January, I think, is Gish Jen's new short story collection, Thank You, Mr. Nixon.
Yeah.
She mostly writes novels. She hasn't had a short story collection in, I don't know, quite a long time. But these short stories are just beautiful, amazing.
I love her short stories. I can't wait to read that. Oh, yeah. I have another one that's coming out in January. It's A Paradise by Hanya Yanagihara, and it is spectacular.
Yeah.
She wrote a little life, and I didn't.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah. Yes, and this one is it's 1893, 1993, and 2093. The same house and descendants of a family in all of those times. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. I have to put that one on my list too.
So many lists, so little
so
time.
many. Let's see. Let me ask you before we go over to audience questions.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a couple more. One is that, well, the pandemic that you wrote about in the sentence is not over, of course, and it's still affecting how authors promote their books. And I wonder, are you doing only virtual events for this book? And do you miss the in-person book tour events?
I am doing only virtual events for this book, but I don't miss being in airports and hotels. I miss being around people, and I think that's the thing we all found out, that we really love being around people more
Yeah.
than we may have
Mhm.
known. But I really have a hard time with travel.
Yeah.
It's very disorienting for me. I'm a home person,
Yeah.
so I have really valued being able to conduct home life, but also I'm so tied to the bookstore. So I
Sure.
really needed to be here during this time,
Hmm.
and it was very lucky that
Yeah. Yeah.
was
I'm
able
very
to
glad to hear that the bookstore has made it through and is doing all right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, and I also wanted to just thank Tomolo Books from St. Peter's in St. Petersburg and Oxford Exchange in Tampa for selling books for this festival,
Yes.
and wish those two stores all the best as well.
Thank you. They will appreciate that very much. They will be excited to have you give them a shout out. I know. All right, let me ask you one more before we go over to audience questions. And that is the obligatory, what are you working on next?
Oh, right. Well, I'm not sure. As always, I'm working on several projects, but I do know that I'm finishing up another book in the Birchbark House series. And this
Oh,
book is more of, I've been asked about by readers and teachers whose children have gone through the middle reader book to maybe write a book that's more of a young adult novel. So that's what this turned out to be. And,
mhm.
but it's still the characters from those earlier books.
Yeah. Oh, that should be great. That's great to have that progression for kids
I
to be
hope
able to
so.
read about those characters as the kids themselves grow older. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, shall we see if the audience has any
Hey,
questions?
looking forward
Ellen?
to.
Hello. There's a lot of love in this chat, so we're gonna have to get you some of that
Oh,
toward
thank
the end here.
you.
Um, I'm going to start with an easy one that you told Colette and I a little bit about, but a lot of people would like to know about the quilt behind you. If it's
Oh,
something that is it your work? Is it someone else's work? They'd like to know more.
I wish I had the patience and the dexterity to make a quilt like this. It's so hard to sew those exact seams, but this is a star quilt, as people can know or can see, and it's um probably all native people in the on the continent. I don't know. It's so um, ubiquitous. These quilts are made by very skilled people in different tribal people, and they are for special events, namings, graduations, um, baptisms, funerals, for religious events, and all kinds of celebrations. And so I've been collecting. The grandma always collects the quilts. That's how it goes, kind of. So I've been collecting quilts for a naming of one of my grandchildren. And this quilt, I had a special feeling for it, so I put it up. But oh, they're given away to special people. For in a naming, for instance, there's a special person who is kind of like a godparent, but only there's spiritual protectors of the child. And so those quilts go to the Wa'es.
So lovely. This next one is a bit of compliment and a bit of question. So I'm going to read it for you in their words. You have enriched my life more than any other author, and I'm just so grateful to have lived during the time you have been writing. Could you please explain the veil in November? I stumbled a bit over that sentence, rereading it and wondering what it meant.
All right. So in not only, in many cultures, this isn't particularly an indigenous belief, but it's a sense that I have. that when the light begins to change and the day shortens, that the worlds of the living and the dead become closer and closer, and we start thinking. I mean, there's Halloween, there's All Souls Days, Saints Day, you know, there's the festival, the Day of the Dead. There's all these festivals that take place. And it is because of the change of light and season where we begin to go into this sort of almost a hibernation. And this is much more maybe a northern sense for me, that things slow down and that the light changes so drastically. But for me, and this is always something I've heard Irish people talk about, there is this veil between, there's this thin places in the world where the living and the dead are close, and there's thin times in the year where the living and the dead are close. So
There you go.
and thank you to that reader for such a moving reaction to the work. Thank you.
It's a lovely one. Do you have a favorite among your books, the books that you have written?
Well, yes, I do. And I'm not going to say it's like they're children. You can't choose a favorite, because books are not like children one at all. they they have a life, but it's very different. And so my favorite one really is The Last Report. And I gave it a title that was way too long, The Last Report on the Miracles at Little No Horse. And that's the book where I felt my voice as a writer really took off in some way that I couldn't explain. And so that book, along with The Plague of Doves, which I think is in, you know, an edition that's way too hard to read right now, a paperback. So I know you're a writer shouldn't do this, but I really suggest looking for the Harper Perennial edition, which is right now only in used bookstores, because I really care about that book and I want it to be accessible and in an easy to read format. So there you go, that one. Those two.
Could you discuss the best place for allies who are not wannabes, but feel things in the heart and want to do something meaningful? I'm an academic and I write academic articles, and I try to keep conversations going around the racism that is still so prevalent. And I'd like to do more.
I love this question because this is a person with, you know, just wonderful boundaries and wonderful humanity. So I want to thank you for in the first place. I would look into what is happening right now with Indigenous people, particularly with resource extractions. And up in Minnesota, Line 3, with Honor the Earth, with 350.org, and with these different organizations that really are struggling so hard to work on treaty rights. With the Native American Rights Fund, might be, you know, one of the most important of our organizations in terms of struggling to keep treaty rights strong and take back and you know, restore some of our land and keep the treaties. This is the most important thing. For Black people, we talk reparations. For Native people, keep the treaties.
I'm going to take us back to you spoke about your book for young people. Any plans to write more? Children's librarian would like to know.
Oh, yes, I have. I'm writing, I guess, 10 books that are toward middle readers and young adult readers. And the next one is, I'm turning it in quite soon. And then there are 3 more after that, or 4. I can't remember. I've lost track. But yeah, I'm very committed to those books. I haven't had a chance to finish one for a while, but I'm very excited about them. So there's more.
This is one that Colette and I will have to come back to, but we had the request to share the book titles in chat or by email, because the reader loves your questions, or loves your recommendations. I got down 4 or 5 of them as we went, but I wasn't fast enough
Great.
for the rest. So
Great.
we will, however, promise to get that out to people who signed up for this event. We'll check the recording and get it back to you.
Mhm.
So. I have a couple coming in now. So what is the best way to assist in keeping the spotlight on the number of Native American women who have disappeared or whose murders are unsolved?
Another phenomenal question, because this is going to the heart of what is an enormous issue of violence against Native women. And I would say, again, the Native American Rights Fund, but also there is in Minnesota, there is a place called the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center that is working very hard to not only rescue and promote nonviolence against all women, but also it is moving into a it has a much larger perspective. So the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center is a great place to start with. Check that out.
Yeah, and that problem is actually part of a kind of subplot in the Night Watchman.
It is, yeah, it is, and it's the main subject of the Roundhouse.
Right.
Roundhouse is really about the repercussions of violent sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
It's told in the voice of the assaulted woman's son.
Yeah.
So it's about what happens to a family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's also funny.
It is. It's hard. Well, I say this often about your books, that you manage to be heartbreaking and hilarious in the same book, sometimes in the same paragraph. And that's one of the things, I love best about your books.
Well, somehow, in this case, he was part of a gang of boys and they just sort of took off.
We have a question about whether you're familiar with the podcast This Land, which is very informative and helps put a spotlight on many Indigenous issues.
This Land?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've tried to get this. I have a really old phone that I'm updating. And so thank you for that recommendation, because I'm going to have to certainly recommend it, but I haven't listened yet.
We have heaps of praise in this chat, but not a ton of questions. And Colette, I know you always have a handful back there. So I'm going to keep an eye out and let you know if anything comes in, but I'm going to send you back to your questions for now.
All right. I have a couple. I have a couple in my back pocket. Let's see. What do I have? Oh, we talked some about this, Louise, that one of the sort of threads that runs through your fiction is your character's role as part of a community. You write beautifully about specific relationships like Tookie and Pollux's marriage and their relationship to their adopted daughter and things like that. But you always kind of enlarge that to extended families and tribes and villages, and in this case, a whole city. And one of the ties here that struck me in the sentence, after George Floyd's murder, is the immediate solidarity between the Indigenous community and the Black Lives Matter marchers. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, historically, Black and Indigenous communities have been, the relationships have been very close. Sometimes it would be a community that was a refuge for enslaved people who were escaping. Sometimes it was in Minnesota, it was a relationship between a Black fur trading family and Native people. So there are all kinds of relationships, and some tribes intermarried so generations ago, and so still that is part of the culture. But in this case, in the city, it was immediately true that Indigenous people, especially young people, really poured out in support. And there were ceremonies. There was a jingle dress dance within the book
Yeah.
that our family participated in, and it was in George Floyd Square.
Yeah.
And so many of the issues are similar, not the same, but similar. And I think one woman described it very, I think, beautifully. I quoted her somewhere in the book saying, we love and support our Black brothers and sisters who were brought here against their will. So, Indigenous people have the ancient relationship with the land, but recognize that Black people did not choose to become colonizers. So it's a very deep, complicated relationship. And I wanted to, just as long as we had a listener who recommended a podcast, I wanted to recommend another really good Native podcast. It's called Tribal Research Specialists, and it's excellent. So there's another one, Tribal Research Specialists. And I think in there may be, well, I can recommend a book, Black Indians is the name of the book. It's been out for a long time, but it's a book that tells about histories of Black Indigenous communities and relationships. So that's one of the books that has been used a lot in schools.
We have a question that relates to this. There are many excellent independent films about Native American issues, but Hollywood doesn't seem to be producing those films. Why not? And have any of your books ever been optioned?
No, my books aren't optioned. I don't really seek that. They're just kind of, I love them as books, and it's up till now it's been a whole. There's been so much difficulty making films that I really would feel comfortable in working with. But something has changed. So something has really shifted, and I would go to TV to look for what I can't remember exactly what platform Reservation Dogs is on, but it's one of the
Hulu.
funniest, one of the best. Rutherford Falls, funny, tremendous. The Wilds has some extremely good. The Wilds. It's about young women who are intentionally marooned together on an island. And there are two Indigenous actors in there whose backgrounds are phenomenally well. They're well cast, they're wonderful actors, and it all rings true. So there are a lot of series and pieces of television that are really coming through right now. So that's where I would go. In terms of films, I would have to reach back to some independent films like The Fast Runner, and I can't pronounce it in Inuit, The Fast Runner, and Powwow Highway, and Smoke Signals. And I'm sure there are some great ones that I'm not thinking of right off, but there are films and there are certainly series that are terrific right now.
Yeah, I think the series that you're talking about not only are they beginning to depict and approach indigenous, cultures and peoples, um, in a way that old-fashioned movies didn't, but also the expanse that a 10-part series
Right.
gives you over a 90-minute movie. Your books are so rich in story and character. I would hate to see somebody try to cram any of your books into a 90-minute movie because I'm not so sure it would work. But as
I don't know. I'm not, but I really like, so yeah, Reservation Dogs,
yeah,
a lot of it was, a lot of the actors and a lot of the humor, if you look into, I think it's on YouTube, yeah, YouTube, the 1491s. And
Hmm.
they did sketches for a few years that were just, they were kind of mind-blowingly hilarious. So I would look there too.
Mhm.
1491s.
We have one other on a similar topic, but what do you think of the new generation of Native American writers, such as Tommy Orange, and how they are representing Indigenous people?
I am absolutely thrilled. I can't I can't say enough because I mean I was holding up Cherie Dimaline and um, Natalie Diaz, also Layli Long Soldier,
Yeah.
Therese Melhot, uh, Tommy Orange is fantastic. If you look in the New Yorker and read a short story by Sterling Holy White Mountain, it will kind of just, there are so many. This story is something you've never read before, and these books are you've never read these before, and part of it is because people kind of think there's a sort of one term kind of fits all Indigenous or Native American literature, but we're hearing from different tribes now, where tribal nations are being represented
Mhm.
in intensely different ways because every tribal nation has a different religion, a different culture, a totally different language, and everything is going to be different. So the capacity of native literature to expand into different tribal nations is just unprecedented right now. There is just an extraordinary explosion of great writing. And I have to also mention for those who like scary books, Stephen Graham Jones, um, Marcy Rendon, great mystery writer. Um, uh, David Wyden, it's right over here, has a tremendous book out. Winter Counts.
Oh yeah.
So David Wombley Wyden. There's just so many. Oh, and then Daryl McLeod with Mama Scotch. Mama Sketch, Mamaskatch. That's a beautiful memoir. So much is coming out, and I know Tommy Orange is going to come out with another book at some point, and it's going to be wonderful. And we just have to be happy that this is happening at this time.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'll note that if you have your copy of the sentence, a lot of the books that Louise mentioned are in that lovely book list at the end.
Right.
Yeah. Ellen, do we have anything else?
I think that it is all to you to close it, Ms. Colette.
All right.
All right.
Um, well, thank you. Thanks to everyone. My deepest thanks to Louise for joining us today. It's always just a delight to speak with you. Congratulations on your Pulitzer and congratulations on the prizes I know you will win in the future. Thanks to independent bookstores, Tom Blow Books and Oxford Exchange for handling ticket and book sales for this event. They have copies available, some of them signed, of books by all of our festival authors, thanks to my able producer, Ellen Clark, and to everyone else at the Times who helped make this festival happen. I really appreciate your support. Thanks especially to our audience. I hope to see you in person next year. Louise, thank you so much.
Thank you, Colette. And thank you as well to an audience who has been faithful to books. And I want to thank you for your work. It's such a pleasure to talk to you and to know that as a critic, you've read so widely, so generously, and so thoughtfully. And I deeply appreciate this.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. I'm lucky I get to do it.
All right, here's to books.
Yes, here's to books and here's to next time we talk. Have a good day, everyone.